What's going on, guys? Today we're swapping tons into our CJ7 buggy project, and we're doing it with a bunch of Barnes four-wheel drive parts.
Oh, that was it.
If you're new to the channel and you're into off-roading, rock crawling, and all things Jeep, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. Today we're putting in a Chevy Kingpin Dana 60 front axle and a 14-bolt rear axle into our CJ7 buggy project. We got a bunch of parts from Barnes four-wheel drive to help make that possible. I'm sure I could have built trusses had I wanted to take the time to do that, but I really didn't want to, and Barnes has done a ton of work when it comes to research and development of this stuff. So we got a truss for the front and a truss for the rear, and then we also got from Barnes a double-ended hydraulic ram steering mount and a pinion bridge for the rear axle. We're going to be mounting all that up and putting it underneath our CJ7 today. We ended up digging out the 14-bolt axle and cleaning it up first, as it had much more basic mounts on it than the front, and we knew it would be a lot easier to deal with. We used my plasma cutter when possible, but it was acting up a lot, so we ended up doing most of everything with cutoff wheels and flap discs. What's going on, guys? We got the Chevy Kingpin Dana 60 front axle for my CJ out here. I picked this up used from someone else who was parting out their rock crawler. It was also in a CJ7, but they did a setup that I don't want to do, as well as their work looks pretty janky, to be honest. Some of this stuff is really interesting and just not how I would have built it. And to be honest, we're trying to figure out how we're going to cut some of this stuff off of here, because it's just weird, to say the least. So we're going to cut as much as the plasma cutter can, probably go through every cut-off wheel we got for the angle grinder and see what we can do. When we made it to the front axle, I finally got frustrated enough with my plasma cutter that was acting up that we actually figured out what was wrong with it and ended up bypassing a temperature sensor so we could get the thing to quit cutting out on us. After we got it working properly, we were able to cut a lot more of the mounts off the axle. The previous owner had put mounts on there several layers thick, so in many spots it was ½ inch or more thick, and it was honestly kind of difficult to cut through. And in two spots, there were over 1 inch thick tabs that the previous owner had made for hydraulic ram steering mounts. This front axle was very interesting, to say the least.
So we just got done lopping off one of these ram mounts off of this axle we're going to swap into the CJ. I just wanted to show you something really quick. This is the piece of metal that we took off, and if you're going to do this at home, please don't do it like this, okay? Look, you got a bunch of 1/8 inch plate that he's welded all the plates together to make one huge, I mean at least 1 inch thick mount. This took forever to get off.
The best way we ended up finding to remove those 1 inch thick mounts was to use a sawzall and a cutoff wheel. We did end up getting them off of there, and then we ended up using a ton of flat discs to clean this axle up. It was a huge pain in the butt, and I honestly hope it's a long time before I have to clean up and prep another axle housing. Once we had that front housing completely cleaned up and prepped, we dug out the barn's Pro Series front truss and decided to mock it up on the axle. The fitment was almost perfect. We ended up having to mark a couple spots and just do some very minimal grinding, and then it was ready to be put on. We tacked it onto the housing and then continued to mock things up from there. So we got the barn's four-wheel drive Chevy Kingpin Dana 60 front axle truss sitting on here. I've tacked it on there really well. As you can see, it fits really nice. Pretty darn pleased with how this fits. Probably fits better than some of the other trusses I've done in the past. Just sat down on there really nice. Anyways, I only wanted to tack it until everything else is mocked up, just in case I have to change something. We're going really slow, being kind of methodical, setting this all up. Next, what we're going to do, and I want to do it while it's only tacked, is we want to mock up the double-ended ram mount. So we're going to mock that up. I've never installed anything quite like that before, so I really want to get that on and somewhat proper before everything is final welded, just in case something doesn't line up. However, I've already mocked it up a little bit, and I really don't think that's going to happen. After that, we're going to put this axle underneath the Jeep so we can mock up our suspension, and we'll weld the truss on the rear axle. I will final weld all of this after all the suspension mock-up is done and we know that we're not going to have to relocate anything. As you guys can see, we have the barn's double-ended hydraulic ram mount tacked on here as well. Same as the truss, I don't want to do any of my final welds until everything's mocked up and I know everything's going to work with each other. I really don't want to have to cut like a mile of welds off just to move something a few degrees or something crazy. So really happy with how all of this located. Had to do very minimal clearancing, and once we did that, it just sat up here really nice. These vertical plates, they all fall in here perfectly. Really pretty happy with how all of this fits together. Pretty impressed. Really looking forward to getting this installed in the Jeep. I've never had a setup quite like this before. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to put it underneath the Jeep and get it roughly where it's going to be. We're going to drag the rear axle out of the garage and start working on the rear axle and get it close to this point as well. The barn's four-wheel drive Pro Series truss for the 14-bolt rear axle ended up being super easy to install. We had to do no clearancing at all. It already fit perfectly. And one thing that worked super well was because I had gotten the pinion bridge, we bolted that on and used the pinion bridge to clock the truss. We butted the truss right up to the pinion bridge, tacked it all together, and it's set. It was a super simple solution. As you can see, we got the trusses tacked on the axles, and we got the axles roughly in place where they're going to be underneath the Jeep, so we can get an idea of how everything's going to work. If you're interested in following along with this build and seeing this awesome buggy when it's completed, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. Our next big project is going to be figuring out all the suspension geometry, and we're going to have our hands full with that. Anyhow, guys, as always, stay active and keep exploring.